Welcome to Podcast Summaries, where every week we break down powerful ideas from 8 to 10 top podcasts to help you grow, heal, and thrive while saving time. If you find this summary helpful, please subscribe and check out links for more content. Your support keeps this journey going. Here is a summarized version of How to Lose Fat Gain Muscle with Nutrition, Alan Aragon, featuring Alan Aragon by Andrew Huberman. Andrew Huberman wants to know about the idea that we can only assimilate 30 grams of protein per meal. Alan Aragon explains that this concept is based on two separate ideas: digestion and utilization at the entire body level, and muscle protein synthesis. The latter is where the 30-gram limit comes from, but it's not a hard and fast rule. In fact, research has shown that consuming more than 30 grams of protein per meal can be beneficial for muscle protein synthesis, especially when combined with resistance training. Alan Aragon mentions a study by McNaughton and colleagues that found that consuming 40 grams of protein after a full-body workout resulted in greater muscle protein synthesis than consuming 20 grams. Another study by John Tromlin and colleagues found that consuming 100 grams of protein after a workout resulted in greater muscle protein synthesis than consuming 25 grams. However, Alan Aragon notes that this study would have been more informative if it had included an intermediate dose to see if there was a plateau in muscle protein synthesis. Alan Aragon suggests that the optimal amount is between 0.4 and 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is equivalent to 0.2 to 0.25 grams per pound. He also notes that the timing of protein consumption is not as important as total daily protein intake, and that consuming protein within a few hours of training is not necessary. Alan Aragon explains that the idea of an anabolic window after training is not supported by research. In fact, a meta-analysis of studies found that as long as total daily protein intake is adequate, the timing of protein consumption does not make a significant difference. He also notes that consuming a high-protein meal every once in a while is not a problem, as long as total daily protein intake is adequate. Andrew Huberman asks if there's anything wrong with consuming a high-protein meal every once in a while, especially if it's difficult to distribute protein evenly throughout the day. Alan Aragon says that there's no problem with this, as long as total daily protein intake is adequate. He notes that the key is to focus on total daily protein intake, rather than the timing of protein consumption. Alan Aragon uses an analogy to explain the importance of total daily protein intake versus the timing of protein consumption. He says that total daily protein is the cake, and the timing of protein consumption is just the icing on the cake. He notes that as long as the cake is adequate, the icing is not as important. Andrew Huberman asks about the effectiveness of fasted training in burning body fat. He wants to know if training on an empty stomach indeed burns more body fat, and if so, whether it's stored body fat or dietary fat. Alan Aragon explains that when comparing two groups with identical diets, the group that trains in a genuinely post-absorptive fasted state will burn more fat during the training bout. Alan Aragon shares a study he conducted with Brad Schoenfeld, where they compared fasted cardio with fed cardio in college-age women. The study found that both groups lost a significant amount of body fat, with no difference in body fat reduction between the two groups. The study also found that the fasted cardio group did not lose any lean body mass, despite not doing any resistance training. Andrew Huberman asks about the importance of protein in nutrition, particularly when it comes to maintaining or losing body fat. Alan Aragon explains that protein is critical because it directly supports lean body mass, is more satiating than carbohydrates and fat, and has a higher thermic effect, meaning it's more energetically expensive to process. He also discusses the hierarchy of protein quality, with animal proteins generally being higher quality due to their higher proportion of essential amino acids and branched-chain amino acids. Alan Aragon shares a study that compared vegan and omnivore diets, finding that as long as total daily protein is adequate, a vegan diet can be just as effective as an omnivore diet in terms of muscle size and strength gains. He also mentions that mycoprotein, a fungus-based protein, has been shown to be effective in promoting muscle protein synthesis. Andrew Huberman emphasizes the importance of exercise in overall health, and notes that while sleep is also crucial, exercise can help offset the negative effects of sleep deprivation. Alan Aragon agrees, and notes that while 1 or 2 days of sleep deprivation may not be detrimental, consistent sleep deprivation can have negative effects on overall health. Andrew Huberman asks if it's possible to gain muscle while losing fat, and Alan Aragon responds with a resounding yes. However, he notes that it doesn't necessarily require a caloric deficit. In fact, studies have shown that it's possible to gain muscle and lose fat, even with a caloric surplus, as long as the protein intake is high enough. He notes that 7 out of the 10 studies showed a lean mass gain dominant, meaning that more lean mass was gained than fat was lost. When it comes to setting calories for someone who wants to gain muscle and lose fat, Alan Aragon suggests keeping the caloric surplus pretty judicious, around 10% above maintenance conditions. He also emphasizes the importance of high protein intake, around 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. Andrew Huberman asks if the caloric surplus should come from quality protein, and Alan Aragon responds with a yes. He notes that studies have shown that adding high amounts of protein to the diet can lead to recomposition, even without a caloric deficit. In fact, one study showed that subjects who added 100 grams of protein to their habitual intake lost fat and gained lean mass, even without exercise. Alan Aragon also notes that the distribution of protein throughout the day doesn't matter as much as getting the total protein correct. He suggests that adding quality protein to the diet, such as an extra chicken breast or a couple of scoops of whey protein, can lead to recomposition. When it comes to carbohydrates, Alan Aragon notes that they are not inherently bad for losing body fat. In fact, studies have shown that as long as total calories and protein intake are equated between groups, there is no significant difference in fat loss between high-carb and low-carb diets. However, he notes that if protein intake is not equated, then a ketogenic diet may lead to greater fat loss due to its higher protein content. Alan Aragon also explains that the term ad libitum means eating as desired, without consciously calculating or restricting calories. Andrew Huberman wonders what happens when people are assigned a diet with a specific macronutrient profile, and they spontaneously eat across a range of studies, somewhere between 400 to 900 calories less per day compared to their habitual intakes or compared to the controlled diet intakes. Alan Aragon responds that this is likely due to the satiating effects of protein and fats in combination, which can lead to a reduction in overall calorie intake. Andrew Huberman shares a personal anecdote about how he would choose to eat 2 hamburger patties if he were hungry on a long drive, rather than French fries, due to the satiating effects of protein. He notes that this makes sense in the context of the keto diet, but acknowledges that it can be challenging to stick to a keto diet in social situations. Andrew Huberman asks Alan Aragon about his thoughts on inflammation and how certain macronutrient profiles may be pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. Alan Aragon speculates that any diet that facilitates substantial fat loss is likely to lower the amount of inflammatory cytokines circulating and emanating from the adipose tissue. He notes that the diet Andrew Huberman described, which lacks hyperpalatability, is effective at reducing inflammation. Andrew Huberman asks Alan Aragon about his thoughts on added sugars, and Alan Aragon responds that they dilute the nutritive value of the diet and contribute to hyperpalatability. Andrew Huberman shares his own experience with added sugars, noting that he has a sweet tooth and loves honey and maple syrup. Alan Aragon jokes that he has a savory tooth and loves Parmesan cheese. Andrew Huberman notes that he uses protein powder to satisfy his sweet tooth, and Alan Aragon suggests that he could replace honey with stevia to reduce his sugar intake. Andrew Huberman asks Alan Aragon about his thoughts on artificial sweeteners, and Alan Aragon notes that there is some literature suggesting that they may be bad for the gut microbiome. However, he also notes that stevia is a plant-derived sweetener that may have some benefits, such as improving glucose tolerance. Andrew Huberman agrees that stevia is a good option, and notes that the negative effects of artificial sweeteners are likely to be minimal unless consumed in absurd amounts. Alan Aragon notes that diet sodas can actually be a useful tool for weight loss, and Andrew Huberman agrees that the controlled intervention trials show positive effects of artificially sweetened beverages on weight loss and metabolic consequences. However, he also notes that there is some observational literature that casts doubt on the health effects of diet sodas, and that the issue of reverse causality can make it difficult to determine the relationship between diet sodas and health outcomes. Andrew Huberman asks Alan Aragon if there's any evidence that coffee or other caffeinated drinks have a thermic effect that allows you to burn more fat. Alan Aragon responds that yes, there is a modest effect, but it's unclear if it's durable enough to be a reliable agent for fat loss. He notes that the literature on coffee and health effects is generally positive, with benefits for cardiovascular health, mortality and other outcomes, but that the benefits may be limited to moderate consumption, defined as 3 to 4 cups per day. Andrew Huberman then asks Alan Aragon about the potential health effects of alcohol consumption, specifically red wine. Alan Aragon notes that while some studies suggest that red wine may have anti-cancer effects, the evidence is not conclusive, and that the relationship between alcohol consumption and health outcomes is complex. He suggests that the context in which alcohol is consumed, including social and lifestyle factors, may play a role in determining its health effects. Andrew Huberman shares his personal experience with quitting alcohol, noting that he was surprised by how much more enjoyable social events became without drinking. He also notes that quitting alcohol helped him develop better coping mechanisms and problem-solving skills. Alan Aragon responds that while some people may be able to consume alcohol in moderation, others may find it difficult to control their drinking, and that the social pressure to drink can be intense. The conversation then turns to the topic of seed oils, with Alan Aragon asking Andrew Huberman if there's any evidence that they're inherently bad for health. Andrew Huberman notes that the scientific consensus is that seed oils are not as bad as some people make them out to be, and that the evidence suggests that they may even have some health benefit. He notes that canola oil, in particular, has a high proportion of omega-3 fatty acids and has been shown to improve blood lipid profiles. Alan Aragon responds that he thinks the negative effects of seed oils may be due to the company they keep, such as being consumed with high amounts of starches and added sugars, and that the quality of the diet as a whole is more important than the type of oil used. Andrew Huberman wonders if people are focusing too much on the wrong things when it comes to nutrition, specifically when it comes to cooking oils. He thinks that the emphasis on seed oils is misplaced, and that the literature actually shows that seed oils are superior to butter, lard, and beef tallow in terms of health outcomes. He's a big fan of extra virgin olive oil and thinks that it's a great choice for cooking. He also mentions that sesame oil, which is a seed oil, has been consumed by healthy populations in Asia for thousands of years. Alan Aragon agrees that olive oil is delicious and a great choice. He also mentions that he's tried to reduce his butter intake over the years but still enjoys the taste of butter. He thinks that it's possible to get a good balance of different fats in the diet by including sources like nuts, eggs, and red meat, as well as plant-based fats like olive oil. Andrew Huberman notes that the Mediterranean keto diet is a great example of how to balance different types of fat in the diet. He thinks that this is a good starting point for people who are trying to balance their fat intake. He suggests that women may need to take it easy during their menstrual cycle and not fight their cravings, and that this can be a good time to take a break from dieting. Alan Aragon asks about collagen supplements, and Andrew Huberman notes that he's a fan of collagen. He mentions that collagen is the most abundant protein in the body, and that it's a key component of skin and connective tissue. He takes 15 grams of collagen per day and thinks that it's a worthwhile investment. Alan Aragon asks about other supplements that Andrew Huberman takes, and Andrew Huberman notes that he's a fan of multivitamins. He thinks that it's hard to get all the necessary micronutrients from food alone, especially when dieting or training. He takes 2 different multivitamins, one with iron and one without, and thinks that this helps to ensure that he's getting all the necessary nutrients. Andrew Huberman asks Alan Aragon about his supplement routine, specifically what he takes with meals. Alan Aragon responds by asking Andrew Huberman to share his own supplement routine, which includes a good quality multivitamin, extra vitamin D3, fish oil, magnesium, creatine, and vitamin C. Alan Aragon notes that Andrew Huberman's supplement routine is not excessively high, and that some of the supplements, such as vitamin D3 and fish oil, have been shown to have positive effects on health. Andrew Huberman explains that he takes his supplements with meals, specifically with dinner, which is his largest meal. He also mentions that he takes extra vitamin D3 because the literature suggests that benefits are seen below 1,000 US, and he takes 4,000 US. Alan Aragon shares a personal anecdote about female family members who experience positive effects from taking 5,000 US of vitamin D3 per day, despite already getting sunlight and eating high-quality food. The conversation then shifts to Andrew Huberman's training routine, where he reveals that he does resistance training 4 to 5 days a week and tries to make it cardio-y by taking shorter rest periods between sets. Alan Aragon notes that this approach is time-efficient and can be beneficial for those who are short on time or have nagging injuries. Andrew Huberman also mentions that he enjoys doing cluster sets, which involve breaking up a set with rest periods, and that he finds it fun and stimulating. However, he notes that doing what one enjoys is important for sticking to a fitness routine. Alan Aragon thanks Andrew Huberman for sharing his approach and notes that it highlights the importance of finding what works for each individual. Andrew Huberman thanks Alan Aragon for having him on the podcast and notes that it's been an honor and a pleasure to be there. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe, check out YouTube channel, and just remember, subscription is only £1 or $1 per month. Leave a comment or review. Until next time, happy listening.